High Admiral Kethrix's secondary heart nearly stopped as the holographic display materialized above his desk. His 4 tentacles, usually maintaining a dignified stillness befitting his station, curled and uncurled in growing agitation. The scout ship's data couldn't be correct. It simply couldn't be. "Run the analysis again," he commanded, all 3 of his eyes fixed on the rotating image of the blue-green world. "We've run it 17 times, Admiral," Lieutenant Zixtol replied, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with anxiety. "The readings remain consistent. The species calls themselves humans, and they've achieved spaceflight despite." The lieutenant's voice trailed off as they pulled up more data streams. The facts defied everything the Galactic Concordat knew about evolutionary physics. This species had developed on a world that should have been impossible to inhabit, let alone dominate. The gravity alone, 9.8 meters per second squared, would crush most sentient species. The dramatic temperature variations from pole to pole should have prevented complex life from developing. And their star, their absurdly bright, radiation-spewing star, should have sterilized the planet's surface eons ago. Yet there they were. Kethrix manipulated the hologram with his upper tentacles, zooming in on one of their population centers, New York City, according to the translation matrix. The beings moved about their daily lives seemingly unaware that they were performing the impossible. They walked upright against crushing gravity, their bizarre calcium-based internal scaffolding somehow supporting their mass. They exposed their skin to direct sunlight, protected by nothing more than a thin layer of melanin and something called sunscreen. "Show me their conflict history," Kethrix ordered, dreading what he would find. The hologram shifted, displaying a timeline that made his chromatophores pale to a sickly green. These humans hadn't just survived their harsh environment. They had spent most of their recorded history trying to kill each other in increasingly creative ways. Yet instead of driving themselves to extinction, each conflict had somehow spurred greater technological advancement. They developed nuclear fission as a weapon. Thrix's voice rose an octave. "And they're still alive." "Yes, Admiral," Zixtol confirmed. "And that's not the most concerning part. After using atomic weapons in warfare, they immediately started exploring peaceful applications of nuclear physics. They turned their most destructive invention into an energy source." Thrix's tentacles wrapped around his support chair for stability. The implications were staggering. Most species took thousands of cycles to recover from their first global war. These humans had fought 2 in rapid succession and emerged stronger each time. "Their space program," he muttered, bringing up the relevant data. By the void, they'd reached their moon using chemical rockets, with analog computers. And their first calculation devices used mechanical switches and vacuum tubes. Zixtol added, their bioluminescence now pulsing with a mix of fear and fascination. They went from basic flight to lunar landing in less than 70 solar cycles. The Admiral sat in silence for several moments, processing the implications. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone who realized they were witnessing a pivotal moment in galactic history. "What you're telling me, Lieutenant, is that we've discovered a species that not only survives but thrives on adversity. A species that turns weapons into tools, that treats radiation as an energy source, and that achieves spaceflight through sheer determination, despite their technological limitations." "Precisely, Admiral. And there's one more thing." Zixtol hesitated before continuing. "They've recently developed primitive faster-than-light travel. The humans call it the Alcubierre drive. They're on the verge of joining the galactic community." Kethrix felt his chromatophores shift to the deep purple of grave concern. He reached for his emergency quantum communicator, the one reserved for direct contact with the Imperial Council. "May the void help us all," he whispered. "Humanity is coming." Dr. Emily Roberts stared at her coffee cup, hiding a smile behind the steam rising from her 4th cup of the morning. For the 3rd straight week, the malfunctioning satellite had adjusted its orbit to get a better view of her observatory. She'd been working at NASA's Arecibo facility long enough to know that space debris didn't make course corrections. "Hey, Mike," she called to her research assistant, who was half asleep at his monitoring station. "I'm putting out breakfast for our friends again. Want to take bets on whether they'll scan the donuts for biological weapons this time?" Mike Townsend groaned, rubbing his eyes. "You know, most scientists would be freaking out about discovering alien surveillance. You're feeding them like they're stray cats." "Stray cats don't use tachyon particles to analyze Boston cream donuts," Emily replied, setting up her usual offering on the observation deck. She added an extra cup of coffee, knowing the aliens would never touch it, but enjoying their increasingly confused readings of the beverage. What her hidden observers didn't know was that Emily had turned their surveillance into the greatest xenobiological study in human history. Every reaction, every scan, every attempt to understand human behavior gave her more data about their technology and biology. Aboard the Imperial science vessel Eternal Curiosity, Chief Researcher Vic Strahl was having a crisis. They'd increased the concentration of the stimulant again, they reported, their tentacles writhing in distress. The liquid now contains enough caffeine to send a Centaurian into cardiac arrest, and they're consuming it with sugar-laden rings of fried dough. Perhaps it's a ritual offering. Junior researcher McTighe suggested, their bioluminescent patches glowing with uncertainty. Though why they'd leave it in direct view of the malfunctioning satellite? "Because she knows we're here," senior analyst Rivek interjected, their chromatophores shifting to a deep shade of realization. "Dr. Roberts has been studying us while we study her. Check the pattern of her behavior against our observation schedule." The holographic display confirmed it. Every time they'd adjusted their surveillance pattern, she'd modified her routine to ensure they had the best possible view of human activities. She'd systematically exposed them to various aspects of human life, from their bizarre dietary habits to their inexplicable ability to function on minimal sleep. "Look at these readings," Vic Strahl said, bringing up a neural scan. "She's operating at peak cognitive efficiency, despite having only slept for 4 hours. The caffeine in her bloodstream should be toxic, yet she's using it to enhance her performance. And most concerning, they paused for dramatic effect. She appears to be enjoying herself. The implications are staggering," Rivek muttered. "We're dealing with a species that can not only survive conditions we consider lethal, but can actually thrive on substances that would kill most sentient beings. And they're clever enough to turn our own surveillance against us." On Earth, Emily was reviewing her latest data set. The alien scanning technology had given her incredible insights into their biology. Their tentacles suggested an aquatic evolutionary background. Their bioluminescence pointed to a world with limited solar radiation, and their reaction to human resilience indicated they came from a low-gravity environment. "You know what's really going to bake their noodles," she said to Mike, grinning as she pulled out her lunch. "Watch what happens when they scan my hot sauce collection." Mike laughed, shaking his head. "You're going to give those poor aliens a heart attack, or whatever organ they use for a heart." 3 hearts. Actually, Emily corrected, casually dabbing ghost pepper sauce on her sandwich. "And they're about to learn that humans don't just tolerate capsaicin. We seek it out for pleasure." Above the observatory, the Imperial researchers watched in horror as their scans registered the chemical composition of Emily's lunch. The emergency alert was sent to High Admiral Cathrix before she'd finished her first bite. The message was simple: the humans are even more terrifying than we thought. They actively consume chemical weapons for entertainment. Lieutenant Jake Martinez was having the most boring shift of his life at the International Space Force's Communications Center when he decided to make history. The alien ship had been hovering at the edge of lunar orbit for 6 hours, presumably working up the courage to make official first contact. The brass was still debating the proper diplomatic protocols, and every government on Earth was arguing about who should speak first. Jake, fueled by his third energy drink and an impressive collection of sci-fi movies, had a better idea. "You know what?" he announced to the nearly empty control room. "I'm just gonna say hi." Before his colleague Sarah could stop him, Jake cleared his throat and opened a general broadcast channel. "Hey there. We've been trying to reach you about your starship's extended warranty." The alien vessel's energy readings spiked dramatically. Sarah nearly spat out her coffee. "Did you just meme at an alien species? If they've been watching us, they should have seen enough of our internet to get it," Jake replied, grinning as he watched the alien ship's confused sensor reactions. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" Aboard the Imperial diplomatic vessel Graceful Discourse, first speaker Tizalera was having an aneurysm. "What do they mean warranty? Did they detect a flaw in our shield harmonics?" They frantically reviewed the ship's diagnostics. "And why would they know about our maintenance schedule?" First speaker, Junior Diplomat Kieran, interjected, their tentacles waving in agitation. "I believe this is what humans call a joke. They take familiar situations and reconstruct them in inappropriate contexts for entertainment value." Before Texalera could process this bizarre concept, another transmission arrived. "Since you're just hanging out up there," Jake continued, "here's a proper welcome. Hello there. We come in peace and would like to offer you a nice egg in these trying times. Also, that's no moon. Wait, actually it is. My bad." The Imperial ship's universal translators crashed spectacularly, their quantum processors overwhelmed by the layers of cultural references and deliberate misuse of language contexts. Texalara watched in horror as their communications team descended into chaos. The humans are simultaneously offering peace, food items, and astronomical corrections. One analyst reported, their chromatophores flashing in confusion. And their transmitter is now broadcasting something called "Never Gonna Give You Up" on a loop. Jake, thoroughly enjoying himself, switched to video transmission. The aliens' collective gasp at seeing a human face for the first time was audible over the comm channel. "Look, we know you've been studying us," he said, smiling broadly and causing several alien diplomats to flinch at the display of teeth. "Dr. Roberts says hi. By the way, she's wondering if you enjoyed the donuts. Anyway, want to grab lunch? We can get tacos. Everyone likes tacos." The first speaker, attempting to salvage some dignity from the situation, finally responded, "Greetings, representative of Earth. We are indeed here to establish diplomatic relations. However, we must first establish proper protocols for—" Cool, Jake interrupted. "But quick question. Do you guys have any allergies? Because if we're doing tacos, we should probably check if cilantro tastes like soap to your species. That'd be awkward." In orbit, the alien diplomats struggled to process how their carefully planned first contact had devolved into a discussion about food chemistry. Their confusion only deepened when they scanned tacos and discovered humans routinely consumed capsaicin-laden substances wrapped in processed grain products. "They want to share a meal," Kieran reported, their voice trembling, "with beings whose biochemistry they know nothing about. And they're suggesting items that register as level 3 biological hazards on our scanners." Jake, oblivious to the panic he was causing, continued cheerfully. "Also, fair warning, if you come down to Earth, people are gonna want selfies. Like, a lot of selfies. Hope you're ready to be TikTok famous." The first speaker, realizing that decades of diplomatic training had not prepared them for this, sent an urgent message to High Admiral Kithrix. "The humans are initiating contact through incomprehensible cultural references and offering to share toxic substances as a friendship ritual. Please advise." Commander Ashley Thompson loved her job. As the lead spacewalk instructor for the new Interstellar Cultural Exchange Program, she got to witness alien diplomats have existential crises on a daily basis. Today's group was particularly entertaining. A delegation of 6 different species, all trying to understand why humans seemed so casually comfortable with the concept of walking in the void. "So you're telling me," Senior Diplomat Anxable said, their crystalline structure vibrating with anxiety, "that before humans had proper spacesuits, they tested high-altitude pressure suits by jumping from the edge of your atmosphere? For fun. "Oh yeah, the good old days of aerospace testing," Ashley replied, helping a tentacled ambassador adjust their safety tether. "Look up Joseph Kittinger sometime. Guy broke the sound barrier with his own body during a freefall. We gave him a medal for it." The aliens' collective horror was palpable even through their environmental suits. "But wait," she continued, grinning beneath her helmet, "that's nothing compared to what people do for weekend entertainment. My brother's into something called free solo climbing. That's when you climb massive cliff faces without any safety equipment." The Orcs' land ambassador promptly fainted, their anti-gravity stabilizers barely catching them in time. "Is this why your species requires redundant cardiovascular systems?" asked Relith, the Ventusian medical officer. "To survive these recreational activities." Ashley chuckled as she led the group through the airlock procedures. "Nah, we've just got the one heart. Though I guess the adrenaline helps. Speaking of which, who wants to learn about wingsuit flying?" 3 more delegates had to be revived after watching the video. She pulled up on her suit's display screen. "This cannot be sanctioned behavior," Anxful protested, their crystalline form now a distinct shade of distress. "Surely your governing bodies prohibit such dangerous activities." "Prohibit? Hell, we televise them. Ever heard of the X Games or ultramarine cave diving? Oh, and there's this great competition called the Running of the Bulls where we—" "Stop!" The collective shout from all 6 diplomats echoed through the communication channel. Ashley shrugged, leading them toward the station's exterior. "Look, I'm just saying that if you think basic spacewalking is scary, you probably don't want to know about competitive eating competitions." Competitive eating. Ryleth's translator struggled with the concept. You turn sustenance consumption into a sport. "Yeah, it's pretty wild. The current hot dog eating record is 76 in 10 minutes, and that's not even counting the ghost pepper challenges." The medical officer's readings showed increasing signs of stress. "You deliberately consume capsaicin in competition quantities, the substance your own species classified as a chemical irritant." "Wait until they hear about ultramarathons," muttered Sarah Chen, Ashley's assistant instructor, over their private channel. "Oh right," Ashley brightened. "Did you know we have races where people run for literally days through Death Valley? It's one of the hottest places on Earth. The record holder did it in temperatures that could cook proteins." The Ventusian medical officer began frantically updating their species' risk assessment database. "But hey," Ashley continued, positioning herself for the first demonstration, "let's focus on the basics. Today we're just going to practice simple spacewalks. Nothing fancy, just stepping out into the endless void of space, protected by a few layers of advanced fabric. You know, beginner stuff." She turned to face the group, only to find them huddled together in what appeared to be a collective panic response. "Are you all okay? You seem a bit tense." Later that day, High Admiral Cathrix received yet another urgent report. This one read, "Humans classify activities with 99.9% fatality risk as sports. Their instructors consider exposure to lethal environments beginner stuff. Request immediate update to species threat assessment. They are not merely surviving their death world. They are actively seeking new ways to challenge death itself, for entertainment." Ashley, meanwhile, was already planning next week's lesson. She figured if they handled basic spacewalking well enough, she could introduce them to the concept of space skydiving. After all, what could possibly go wrong? Major David Cooper was having what he'd charitably call a challenging Monday morning. The alien cruiser's fusion core was approaching critical failure. Their engineering team was incapacitated by a coolant leak, and the emergency radiation suits were 3 decks away. Most species would consider this a hopeless situation. David considered it an inconvenience. "How long until core breach?" he asked, already removing his uniform jacket and rolling up his sleeves. 7 minutes, the ship's eye responded. "But Major Cooper, the radiation levels in engineering air." Yeah, definitely lethal." "Got it." He took a long swig from his coffee thermos. But definitely lethal is more of a suggestion than a rule for humans. Ask the tardigrades. The AI's logic circuits nearly froze trying to process this statement. In the ship's command center, Captain Zizexvala watched in horror as the human officer strode purposefully toward certain death. Major Cooper, we cannot allow you to enter that chamber. The radiation levels are beyond survivable parameters. With all due respect, Captain, David replied, pausing at the engineering deck's entrance. Humans have a pretty loose definition of survivable parameters. Besides, I've got two things working in my favor. And those are coffee and spite. He grinned. Also, I'm missing my skydiving session this weekend, so this better be worth it. Before anyone could stop him, David had bypassed the safety protocols and entered the engineering deck. The ship's sensors immediately began registering the devastating effects of radiation on his body. Yet somehow, impossibly, he kept moving. Status report. Captain Zizexvala demanded, their tentacles writhing in anxiety. The human's cellular structure is degrading, the AI reported, its tone reflecting confusion. Yet his cognitive functions remain intact. He appears to be humming. Indeed, David was casually humming Another One Bites the Dust, while manually realigning the fusion core's containment field. His hands were steady despite the rising radiation burns, and his movements remained precise even as his body absorbed enough radiation to kill most species several times over. Hey, quick question. He called out through the comm system, his voice remarkably cheerful for someone experiencing catastrophic cellular damage. Does your medical bay have those fancy regeneration pods like the ones on the diplomatic vessels? Because I gotta tell you, this is probably going to need more than just a Band-Aid. Captain Zizexvala was too stunned to respond. They watched as this impossible being methodically prevented a disaster that should have claimed hundreds of lives, apparently concerned more about missing his weekend plans than his own mortality. 4 minutes later, the fusion core stabilized. The radiation levels began dropping, and emergency systems came back online. David stumbled out of engineering, his skin showing severe radiation burns, but his grin somehow intact. See, no problem, he managed before collapsing. Though I could really use another coffee. The ship's medical team worked frantically to save his life, amazed to discover that his body had already begun repairing some of the radiation damage. Human cellular regeneration, it seemed, was yet another biological impossibility they'd have to accept. When David regained consciousness 3 days later, his first words were, "Did anyone feed my cat?" The medical officer, Dr. Ixnell, could only stare in disbelief. Major Cooper, you absorbed enough radiation to kill a Kraxan war beast. Your cellular structure was compromised. By all known medical science, you should be dead. Yeah, but have you seen my weekend hottie? This was nothing compared to competitive rock climbing. He tried to sit up. Speaking of which, am I cleared for light activities? The climbing gym has a new route I've been meaning to try. The report sent to High Admiral Kithrix this time was succinct. Human officers survived 17 times the lethal radiation dose through what he describes as coffee and spite. Upon recovery, immediately requested permission to resume recreational near-death activities. Recommend immediate review of all previous assumptions about human physiological limitations. They appear to be more guidelines than actual rules. David, meanwhile, was already planning his next adventure. After all, if you could walk away from a fusion core breach, what was a little free solo climbing between friends? Captain Madison Parker stood before the Galactic Commerce Council, her presentation slides ready and her grin worryingly wide. Behind her, a hologram displayed what she proudly called the Yeet Cannon 9000, a cargo deployment system that violated at least 17 different galactic safety protocols. So here's the thing, she began, ignoring the horrified expressions of the alien council members. Your current cargo transfer methods are super safe, very precise, and absolutely boring. My solution is faster, cheaper, and way more fun to watch. Chief Administrator Xthor's tentacles curled in distress. Captain Parker, your proposed system involves deliberately launching cargo pods at near relativistic speeds and catching them in gravitational nets. The margin for error is practically zero if you do the math right. Madison interrupted, pulling up another slide. And look, I even added racing stripes to the pods. That makes them go faster. That's not how physics works, the Ventusian science director protested. Tell that to the Orcs, Madison muttered under her breath, before continuing louder. But check this out. We've already successfully tested it with the Mars supply runs, reduced delivery time by 78%, and gave the colonists some awesome explosion footage for their social media. Explosion footage. Oh, relax. Those were controlled detonations. Mostly. She waved dismissively. Besides, we fixed that issue with some duct tape and WD-40. The Council's universal translator struggled to process these terms, eventually settling on adhesive strip of unknown composition and miraculous liquid of mysterious properties. You modified advanced stellar-grade equipment with primitive binding materials. The Technology Oversight Director's crystalline form vibrated with anxiety. Madison shrugged. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it is broke, duct tape. If that doesn't work, give WD-40. Basic engineering principles, folks. She pulled up another slide showing cargo pods screaming through space, their racing stripes indeed making them look faster. But here's the real kicker. We can deploy emergency supplies to any colony in the sector within hours instead of days. Watch this simulation. The Council watched in mounting horror as the simulation showed cargo pods being launched in rapid succession, creating what Madison cheerfully called a supply chain heat stream. Is that pod on fire? Someone asked weakly. Atmospheric entry is more art than science, Madison replied. But don't worry, we got a 96.8% success rate. The other 3.2% make for great YouTube content. The Council's horror only deepened when they realized she was serious about broadcasting cargo mishaps for entertainment. But what truly terrified them wasn't the technology itself. It was how quickly other species began adopting human innovations. Within weeks, young engineers across the galaxy were asking dangerous questions like, what would humans do? And does it really need all these safety features? The Arcturian cargo fleet was the first to implement modified yeet tubes as they became known. Their efficiency increased by 300%, though their insurance premiums skyrocketed. The Ventusians followed suit after their junior engineers staged what they called a safety protocol rebellion. Madison found herself flooded with consultation requests. She handled them all with the same cavalier attitude that made the Council question human sanity. Look, she explained to a particularly nervous Xenon shipping executive. Sometimes you need to think outside the box by literally throwing the box at relativistic speeds. Trust the math, add some racing stripes, and keep the duct tape handy. The report to High Admiral Cathrix was panic-stricken. The humans have begun optimizing our infrastructure. Their solutions consistently violate safety protocols while achieving unprecedented efficiency. Worse, their methods are spreading. Yesterday, a Zentorian engineer asked if we could juice up a quantum drive with something called monster energy. We had to confiscate their entire supply of energy drinks and adhesive materials. Madison, meanwhile, was already working on her next project. If they think the yeet cannon is wild, she told her team, wait until they see what I can do with a trebuchet in zero gravity. The universe, it seemed, wasn't ready for human engineering. But then again, it had never been ready for humans in the first place. Admiral Ryan O'Neill had a talent for causing interstellar incidents without even trying. Today, he was about to outdo himself at the Galactic Security Council's classification hearing, armed with nothing but a bottle of hot sauce and what he called his diplomatic smile. Distinguished members of the Council, he began, standing before the assembled representatives of 57 spacefaring civilizations. I understand you're having trouble fitting humans into your existing species classification system. Senior Counselor Zexthar's tentacles twisted nervously. Admiral O'Neill, your species defies every categorical framework we've established over 12 millennia of galactic civilization. You're simultaneously too peaceful to be classified as warriors, too aggressive to be classified as diplomats, and too creative to be classified as scientists. Too creative. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Is this about Captain Parker's yeet cannon? Because I told her the racing stripes were a bit much. It's about everything. Junior Counselor Nivex burst out, their crystalline form flickering with agitation. Your species treats lethal radiation as a minor inconvenience, turns weapons into energy sources, modifies high-tech equipment with primitive adhesives, and apparently considers the consumption of chemical irritants a recreational activity. Ryan brightened at that last point. Oh yeah, speaking of which, he pulled out his bottle of Carolina Reaper hot sauce. Anyone want to try some? It's my own recipe. 3 different species activated their emergency containment fields. Admiral, Zexthar said carefully, our scanners indicate that substance would be classified as a chemical weapon in 17 star systems. Nah, this is the mild version. You should see what we put on wings during football games. He paused thoughtfully. Though maybe we should start with something gentler. Anyone up for wasabi? The Council's xenobiologists, who had just finished cataloging the effects of standard earth peppers, began updating their threat assessments yet again. This. Nivex gestured frantically at Ryan's casual demeanor. This is exactly what we're talking about. You treat everything that should terrify you as entertainment. Do you know what happened when we shared the human entertainment database with our population? Let me guess. Everyone's doing Parker now. 3 separate species have developed extreme sports leagues. The Venturians, who haven't left their environmental suits in 10,000 years, are now asking about something called base jumping. Ryan tried, and failed, to suppress a grin. Well, at least they're not into free solo climbing yet. They are. The Arcturian youth are calling it pulling a human when they take unnecessary risks. Zixthar's tentacles were practically tying themselves in knots. We need a new classification just to warn people about your influence. Might I suggest class? Bossum. Ryan offered helpfully. The council ignored him and began deliberating. After 6 hours of heated debate, during which Ryan entertained himself by showing increasingly spicy food videos to horrified junior staff members, they'd reached a decision. We hereby classify humanity as species type X, Zixthar announced gravely. Definition: a species that is individually and collectively beneficial to galactic civilization, while simultaneously representing an existential threat to established safety protocols, common sense, and psychological stability. Cool, Ryan said, already designing the t-shirt in his head. But can we add mostly harmless somewhere in there? It's a classic reference. The council, unaware they were being memed at, updated the classification to species type X, mostly harmless, but absolutely terrifying. The report to High Admiral Kithrix this time came directly from the council. We've created an entirely new classification for humanity. Unfortunately, they seem to view this as an achievement rather than a warning. Additionally, Admiral O'Neill has somehow convinced several council members to try something called ghost pepper chips. We've had to update our medical protocols accordingly. Ryan, meanwhile, was sending a message to Earth. Good news and bad news. Bad news, we're officially classified as an existential threat to galactic safety standards. Good news, I've got 50 alien species interested in a hot sauce competition. Also, does anyone know if we can get a bulk discount on milk for non-humanoid species? Asking for some very distressed friends. Colonel Samantha Hayes stared at the holographic display of the approaching Void Swarm fleet with what could only be described as inappropriate enthusiasm. The Empire's top military commanders had spent the last hour explaining why this was an extinction-level threat. Sam had spent that same hour taking notes on what she called speedrun strats. "So let me get this straight," she said, munching on ghost pepper chips that made the alien officers flinch. "These void creatures are weak to electromagnetic pulses, but your ships can't get close enough without being torn apart by their gravity weapons." High Admiral Kethrix's tentacles wavered anxiously. "Correct. Our fastest ships would take at least 7 minutes to reach effective range, and the Void Swarm's gravitational fields would." 7 minutes. Sam interrupted, grinning. "Oh man, we can totally sequence break this. Hey, someone call Captain Parker. I need her yeet cannon technology." "Colonel Hayes," Kethrix said carefully, "this is not one of your human video games. We cannot simply. Actually, we totally can." She pulled up a tactical display. "Look, if we treat this like a boss fight, the Void Swarm has obvious pattern recognition. They're using the same attack formations they used in the Orion sector. It's practically a speed-running opportunity." The alien commanders watched in horror as Sam began drawing up battle plans that looked suspiciously like video game combo moves. "See, we don't need to survive their gravity weapons if we're going fast enough," she explained, her eyes gleaming. "We load up Parker's cargo pods with EMP devices, accelerate them to near-light speed, and basically clip through their defenses. It's like sequence breaking in Metroid." Did she just suggest exploiting relativistic physics like a game glitch? One of the science officers whispered. "Even better," Sam continued, now practically bouncing with excitement. "We can turn this into a competition. First fleet to take down a Void command ship gets bragging rights. We'll stream it on Twitch." The Empire's strategic AI nearly crashed trying to process this approach to warfare. 24 hours later, humanity had transformed the greatest threat to galactic civilization into what they called a server-wide event. Colonel Hayes had organized the combined fleet into raid groups, complete with leaderboards and achievement tracking. "Void command ship down in Sector 7, a human officer announced. "New speed record, 6 minutes 12 seconds. Suck it, Arcturian Squadron." The Void Swarm, faced with an enemy that treated their terrifying offensive as an opportunity for competitive scoring, began showing signs of confusion. Their perfectly coordinated attacks faltered as human ships executed maneuvers that the Empire's tactical computers labeled physically improbable. And why would anyone even try that? "You know what's really wild?" Sam commented to Kethrix as they watched another Void ship explode. "Their attack patterns are super predictable once you treat them like Dark Souls bosses. They even have obvious weak points that flash before major attacks." "Colonel Hayes," Kethrix said weakly, "are you suggesting we're defeating an ancient cosmic horror because it follows video game logic? I mean, if it works." She shrugged, then grabbed her comm unit. "Hey, who just hit that no-damage run on the Void Destroyer?" Because that was clean as hell. The final report to the Galactic Security Council read, "Humanity has redefined warfare as a competitive sport with rankings and live commentary. The Void Swarm, unable to comprehend an enemy that treated extinction-level combat as an entertainment event, has retreated from known space. Colonel Hayes is now running what she calls weekend raids to clear remaining Void presence, complete with achievement hunting and something called speed-running strats. Most disturbing of all, it's working." Sam, meanwhile, was already planning the next phase. "Look," she explained to a bewildered alien command staff, "if we apply Doom Eternal gameplay mechanics to our fleet movements, we can probably clear the entire Orion arm by next Tuesday. Also, anyone want to join my Discord server? We're doing achievement runs on Void motherships this weekend." The galaxy, it seemed, had finally understood why the humans were classified as they were. They weren't just survivors or warriors or innovators. They were something far more terrifying. They were gamers who had brought their speedrunning strategies to real-world space combat. And somehow, against all logic, they had turned the most dangerous threat in galactic history into a competitive leaderboard challenge, and won.